Today, we're talking about the error that you may have seen many times, the too many requests error. Well, that's rate limiting in play, and that's what we'll break down today. Rate limiting is a very important and fundamental concept of system design because this is one of the main techniques that engineers use to prevent systems from failing and falling apart. Rate limiting is what you add when traffic is not just high, but unpredictable, spiky, or abusive. At a fundamental level, rate limiting is just a rule like this user can make 100 requests per minute, this IP can make 10 login attempts per minute, or this API key can make 1000 requests per hour. Now, if the client goes over that limit, the system rejects the request, usually with HTTP 429, too many requests. And this is a simple idea, but let's unpack it a bit more because there's much more going on here than just blocking requests. By the way, this video is part of the System Design for Beginners playlist on this channel, and it'll probably have more than 50 videos. There's also an intermediate system design playlist that you can watch after that. If you binge watch both of these playlists, you'll know system design better than 99% of the people on this planet. Anyway, rate limiting has three components. The identity, which is who are we counting against? Is it a specific user, an IP address, an API key? And this matters a lot, and we'll get into it properly later. The next is the limit, which defines how many requests are allowed. Is it 10, 100, or 1000? This number is usually based on what your system can safely handle, and it often varies by endpoint or user tier. The third is the window, which is over what period of time. Is it per second, per minute, per hour, or per day? For example, a 100 requests per minute limit is very different from 100 requests per second. One is very generous, the other is extremely strict. So when you change any of these three things that we talked about, you get a completely different behavior. Now, when a client usually crosses the limit, the server responds with HTTP 429, which is too many requests. And this is the standard status code. That means you're sending too much, slow down. Now, along with the 429, a well-behaved server usually also sends a retry after header, which tells the client exactly how long to wait before trying again. So this is something like come back in 30 seconds. This gives clients a clear signal to back off gracefully instead of just hammering the server and getting rejected over and over. Now, from the client's perspective, seeing a 429 should trigger a pause and retry and not an immediate retry loop. We'll talk more about what good client behavior looks like in some time. Now, one way to think about rate limiting is as a contract between the client and the server. The server is saying, I will serve you reliably as long as you stay within these bounds. And if you go beyond them, I'll push back. And this is why most public APIs publish the rate limits clearly in their documentation. GitHub, Twitter, Stripe, OpenAI, they all tell you upfront, here's how many requests you get per minute, and here's what's going to happen if you exceed it. I'll now take you through 6 reasons why rate limiters are awesome. The first is they protect your servers and databases. Now, even if your app servers auto-scale, your database often does not scale linearly, and a sudden spike can cause connection pool exhaustion, slow queries, cascading timeouts, and total outage. Rate limiting prevents overload by cutting traffic early. Number 2, rate limiters stop abuse and brute force. Login endpoints are classic targets of abuse and brute force, and attackers do something called as password guessing and credential stuffing, where attackers use leaked username and password lists from other breaches and try them on your website. And after that, they try for OTP and verification code guessing as well. And rate limiting makes these brute force attacks expensive. They're not impossible, but expensive enough that's not worth to try it. Rate limiters ensure fairness. If one customer sends 10x more traffic than everyone else, then that should not degrade the experience for others. Rate limiters help you control costs. In AI-heavy systems, like with LLMs, image generation, video generation, each request can cost real money. And rate limiting is literally a cost firewall. Rate limiters help with preventing scraping and data harvesting. So if your platform has publicly accessible data, like product listings, user profiles, prices, job postings, there will always be bots trying to scrape all of it. And rate limiting slows scrapers down enough that large-scale harvesting becomes impractical. 6, rate limiters help with protecting third-party dependencies. Your system does not just receive traffic, it also sends traffic to things it depends on, like payment processors, email providers, SMS gateways, and external APIs. These all have their own rate limits, and if your code accidentally hammers them, you'll get cut off. A great way to think about this is rate limiting is both a reliability tool and a security tool. And in AI-heavy or third-party dependent systems, it's also a financial tool. Now, before we continue, I want to take a few seconds and go a bit off topic and tell you about the Algoroq cohort, which is a live cohort that I usually run with about 10 to 15 senior engineers in a cohort. You might know that there are no cohorts that exist for senior engineers, who already know the basics of architecture and system design. And now I want to take things to the next level and build next generation production software in the post-AI world. So this is a 12 weeks program, and we cover topics like advanced system design, AI native system design, architecture for the post-AI world, and tips and tricks to use AI coding tools, but from a senior engineer perspective. So I'm planning the next cohort, which is actually my third cohort, and it's going to be around mid or end of May 2026. So I want you to go through the Algoroq website. It's algoroq.io website. And I want you to take a look at these topics that we're going to cover in the cohort. And if you like this, I want you to fill up the form that opens up when you hit the enroll button. Once you fill it up, I'll check to see if you're a great fit, and then we'll set up a call with you. It's about $2,500 for the entire live cohort, and I teach the cohort personally. It's a great experience, and once you fill the form, you can also talk to any of the people who have attended the cohort previously, and you can then decide if you want to go ahead. But if you just wanted access to pre-recorded cohort videos and other resources, it's just $800. All right, now back to the video. Now let's talk about where you actually enforce it. Think of a request journey like this. A client sends a request, it travels through the internet, hits some kind of entry point, passes through your infrastructure, and finally reaches your application and database. Rate limiting can set at different points along that journey, and where you put it matters a lot. Now the first option that we have is placing the rate limiter at the API gateway or the load balancer level itself. And this is the most common place to enforce rate limiting, and for good reasons as well. And it's because the API gateway sits right at the front door of your system. Every request coming in has to pass through it before it reaches any of your app servers. So when a request arrives, the gateway checks, has this client exceeded the limit? If yes, it gets rejected right there, and it never touches your app servers, your database, or anything, and you stopped it right at the gate. And this is exactly what you want. You're not wasting any internal resources on a request you are going to reject anyway. Tools like Nginx, Envoy, Kong, and AWS API Gateway all have rate limiting built in or available as a plugin. Our second option is having the rate limiting inside the application. Here, the rate limiting logic lives in your actual code inside your app servers. And every time a request comes in and reaches your app, your code checks a counter, decides whether to allow or reject, and responds accordingly. The big advantage here is flexibility. You have full access to everything, who the user is, what plan they're on, what feature they're hitting, what time it is, and you can write any logic you want. But here's the problem. In production, you're not running just one app server, you're running many. And if each server is making its own decisions, then a user can just spread those requests across servers and bypass your rate limiting. The third option we have is at the edge. So edge rate limiting means enforcing limits as close to the user as possible before traffic even reaches your infra. Services like Cloudflare and Fastly run services all over the world in data centers close to your users. And when a request is made, it hits one of these edge servers first. If that request is from someone who's already exceeded the limits, it gets dropped right there, thousands of miles away from your actual system. Now, rate limiting has a lot of flexibility. You can rate limit by multiple things. It could be IP address, API key, user ID, device ID, or it could be endpoint specific. Now let's talk about the main algorithms that govern rate limiting. The first is the fixed window counter. You can set a rule like allow 100 requests per minute. And the way it works is you store a counter for a particular key and how many requests are allowed in a minute, and you increment the counter on each request. If the counter exceeds the limit, then you reject it. But people usually exploit this with boundary bursts. A client can send 100 requests at 12 hours and 59 seconds, and then another 100 requests at 12 hours and 1 minute. That's 200 requests in 2 seconds, and both windows allow it, and that's a big problem. And that's why sliding window is a more accurate method, which is instead of a hard minute boundary, it considers the last 60 seconds continuously. And so you have two common implementations for this. The first one is sliding window log, which stores timestamps, so it's very accurate, but memory heavy at scale. And the second is sliding window counter, where you use approximation using two windows. It's more common in practice. So sliding window smooths the bursts, but costs more complexity. The third one is called the token bucket, and this is the most popular. So think of a bucket of tokens. Bucket refills at a steady rate, like let's say 10 tokens per second, and each request consumes 1 token. So if no tokens are remaining, then reject that request. So this allows small bursts if the tokens are accumulated, but keeps the long-term rate controlled. What you need to know here is token bucket is popular because it balances burst tolerance and steady protection. And if you didn't understand these algorithms, don't worry, there will be dedicated videos for each of these algorithms individually in coming videos, because these are huge topics in themselves and they require dedicated videos for each of these algorithms. And the fourth one is a leaky bucket, and it has a smoother output. So requests leave at a constant rate, like a queue draining steadily. So it's useful when you want to smooth traffic to downstream systems that can't handle sudden bursts. So how do you handle things if the rate limiter fails? There are usually two options. The first one is called fail open, which means you let the traffic through. The limiter is down, so instead of blocking requests, you just stop enforcing limits and serve everything. The benefit is obvious. Legitimate users don't get logged out of your product. But the risk is equally obvious. Without rate limiting, your backend is suddenly exposed to whatever traffic shows up, including abusers, attackers, and bots. The second one is failed closed system, which is the exact opposite. So if the limiter is down, you block everything, or at least block anything that would have normally gone through the rate limiting. The benefit is that your system stays protected no matter what, and the risk is that a single failure in the limiter turns into a full outage, even though your backend is perfectly healthy. So you just take yourself down to prevent a theoretical attack. Now in practice, real systems don't just pick one approach globally. The choice is endpoint specific. So for high risk endpoints like the login and sign up routes, most teams use the fail closed method. And for the general read APIs, like fetching a user's profile, loading a product page, reading a feed, etc., most teams use the fail open method. Now let's say a client sends a request and your rate limiter rejects it. But now what? How is the client supposed to know what went wrong and what should it do next? This is where HTTP conventions come in. When you reject a rate limited request, you return 4 to 9 too many requests. That status code exists for exactly this purpose. It tells the client you were not blocked because you're unauthorized. You were not blocked because the server is broken, but you were blocked because you sent too many requests. But just 429 alone is not enough. You should also send back a retry after header, which tells the client exactly how long to wait before trying again. It might be a number of seconds or an actual timestamp. There are more advanced ideas around this, like exponential backoff and jitter, but we'll bother about that in the intermediate system design playlist that I'm building on this channel. Now in production systems, rate limiting is almost never just a one limit for everything. Different endpoints actually need different rules, different users deserve different treatment, and no single layer of protection is enough. So what you need are patterns. Let's discuss 3 popular patterns for setting up rate limiters in production. Now in the first pattern, you set up different limits per endpoint. So the login endpoint might allow 5 requests per minute because nobody legitimately logs in more than that. And anything higher is almost certainly an attack. Search might allow 60 per minute. Feed might allow 300 per minute. The limit matches both the cost of your system and the risk profile of the endpoint. Second pattern sets different limits per user tier. We treat users differently based on what they've paid for or what they've earned. Free users might get 100 requests per minute. Pro users might get 1000 requests per minute, and enterprise customers might have no practical limits at all. This isn't just monetization, it's also risk management. A paying user with their card on file is far less likely to be an abuser than an anonymous free user. So the limits can be generous. The third pattern implements layered limits. A per user limit catches the individual user, a per IP limit catches someone running a script across multiple accounts, and above both of them, a system-wide circuit breaker catches a scenario where something has gone very wrong. So you can have different layers of these rate limits. Now, we've learned a lot about rate limiters, what they are, how they work, patterns to use in production, algorithms, best practices, and so on. And I'm sure you appreciate the amount of time that goes into building these diagrams and making these videos. So please subscribe to this channel, like and share this video, and comment if you have any questions. And I'll see you in the next video.